What if you could make amazing cafe quality wraps at home that not only taste better than absolutely anything you would get at a store, but also for a fraction of the cost? Oh wait, you can. Hello, my name is Ben. Welcome to my channel where I'm trying to master the art of living, unbelievably. Easy wraps. A lot of bakers talk about the importance of high protein bread flour, and although it does make a difference, for many types of bread I barely notice it. In fact, this recipe is so easy, even kneading properly won't make much difference, and so these wraps are a great bread to start out on and to practice many of the techniques of bread making. Obviously, a seasoned baker is also going to rejoice at these easy, fast, cheap and versatile wraps. So for this simple recipe I will be using 330 grams of cheap all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of salt, 200 grams of water, 1.5 teaspoons of baker's yeast and 1 teaspoon of sugar. I will be using a set of scales to measure the flour and the water. I've got a jug for the liquid, a bowl or container or whatever will also work. I've got a fork to stir and mix. I also have a measuring teaspoon, a rolling pin and a dough scraper, which could be substituted with a knife or something. If you don't have scales, you can search the equivalent in Google. For example, how many cups is 330 grams of all-purpose flour? Although when bread making I do recommend using scales to keep things consistent, as when using cups it's easy to add too much or too less flour, which, if even slightly off, will change the consistency of the dough. If you don't have scales, don't let this discourage you though, just give it a go measuring with cups and look out for a cheap scale. I buy the yeast in bulk and keep it in the freezer so it will last years. Using sachets, although easier and a touch quicker, is just way too expensive for me considering I bake a lot. I use 1 teaspoon of sugar in with the yeast as this helps increase the yeast's activity, speeding up the whole process. Always use my recipes as a guide that you will tweak with your own preferences over time as you get to know what you want. So I'll start off by zeroing out the weight of the jug so I can measure out 200 grams of water. Cold water straight from the tap is fine. To this I am adding 1.5 teaspoons of baker's yeast and 1 teaspoon of sugar and stirring it with the fork until it is mixed in. So now I am zeroing out the large bowl on the scale and weighing out 330 grams of flour and adding the 1 teaspoon of salt to the flour. Then 5 minutes or so later the yeast water is starting to get some bubbling on top, and even if it wasn't, I'm still going to pour it into the flour mix and then begin to bring as much of it together as I can with a fork. As it comes together, I'm going to ditch the fork and start to knead it a bit by pressing it out, then folding it back up a bit onto itself, then press it out again, then fold it back up onto itself again, etc. I'll also scrape the dough into the sides of the bowl and get as much flour from the sides into the dough as I can. All of this takes 2 to 3 minutes or so. Then, once everything is combined well, I'm going to take the dough out and give it a good 4 to 5 minute knead on the bench, pushing it out, then folding it back up over itself, turning it a quarter of a turn, pushing it out, folding it back up over itself, turning it 90 degrees and over and over and over again. Notice how the dough changes as you knead. 4 minutes later I'm now making a dough ball by dragging the skin under the ball and stretching the skin out over the dough. Or just shape it into a ball however you can and put it back into the bowl and cover. I'm going to let it rest for 15 minutes or so, then I'm going to get it out and divide it into 6 equal pieces. Then with each piece I'm going to fold it into itself 8 to 10 times, folding into the same point each time, going around the dough like so. Then the point I've folded into will be the bottom of the dough ball I'm now stretching out, just like the larger one I did earlier. But again, as long as it's a ball, it's going to still work fine. So do it however you can. I'm only making 2 wraps today, so the other 4 dough balls are going into a floured container to be made fresh over the next couple of days. I'm going to dust flour all over these so they don't stick to each other as they will rise in the containers. The 2 I'm making now I will fold and roll into a ball like the others, dust and leave on a slightly floured bench covered. If I had time I would give it a bulk ferment and wait for the balls to double in size, but I'm wanting mine ASAP so I'm only leaving it to rest for 10 minutes. The ones in the fridge will ferment very slowly, which enhances the flavour. Texture wise they will all turn out pretty similar though, as they are only wraps. So after letting them rest for 10 minutes, I'm going to use a rolling pin to roll them out about 25 centimeters or so wide. When rolling, you might want to make sure both sides of the dough always have enough flour or it might stick. Notice how I try to only roll out the middle. This will help keep the wraps round. As I knead, I add more flour, just a good sprinkle and a bit of a light rub. Usually I will roll out one, put it on to cook, and quickly roll out the next one as I cook the current one, but for filming purposes I'm just going to roll them all out at once. As I finish the last one, instead of dusting with fresh flour, I mop up the flour flour on the bench instead, and now we're ready to cook. I'm going to take a fry pan or skillet and heat it up well on medium-high heat. Once it's fully heated, I'm simply going to spray on some oil and put an uncooked wrap on, and then quickly adjusting the dough to make sure any kinks or bumps are mostly smoothed out. Wait a minute or so, then flip. There are some bubbles forming, so I'll pop them and flatten them out. Also see how it is starting to get some light browning in spots. I think I want it a touch more cooked than that, so I'll flip it again after a minute or so. I'll give each side another 30 seconds or so before putting it in a pot with a lid on to steam. Then I'll do something similar with the other wrap, and when it is done, I'll put it into steam with the other one. At which point, they're ready to eat, but preferably give them at least a few more minutes to steam. They can be eaten warm or after they're cool, or they can be put in a container and stored in the fridge for a few days or so. Also, the dough balls you may have put in the fridge can simply be taken out of the fridge and rolled out and cooked just like we have done here. These wraps could be used in a pinch for anything from a burrito to a Turkish kebab to a bacon and egg breakfast wrap and anything in between. I made a hoisin pork wrap with mine. Delicious. And as they say, that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.